much, Nick.
Of course. I'll make the host again. See you later.
Thank you. So, Vivian, I think you can start. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vivian Harton, and I'm a second-year undergraduate student of Professor Lockhart. This collective housing project is called the New Orleans Natural Village. Beginning the semester, I designed 3 home typologies that maximize living experience within a limited square footage. These homes are each around 1,200 square feet and serve 5 people. The horizontal home is a 1-story single-family residence that features a courtyard and places an emphasis on the common space. The vertical home is a 5-story split-level building that shifts the notion of common living upwards, while the sectional home solves for privacy and elevation, with most of the interior space elevated and offset from the base. This collective housing project expands on the concepts that each of these projects experiment with, such as privacy, circulation, and increased density in living space. An analysis of a typical New Orleans porch looked at these as intermediate spaces between the private interior of a home and the wholly public sidewalk. This analysis was particularly influential in the design of the project because it inspired the circulation patterns that walk the line between private and public. The site of the project is home to French Truck Coffee and Charlie's Steakhouse, which in addition to one other home remain on the site. The neighborhood itself is quiet and residential, and it features the 1- and 2-story shotgun homes that are typical of New Orleans. Inspiration for the project was taken from the concept of the New Orleans porch, which expresses the easy pace of the city and then the common appreciation for quality time spent outdoors. And with this in mind, the main goal of the project became maximizing the outdoor experience of the residents. I looked at other co-housing projects, such as the Urban Village project by Effect Architects, and I observed commonalities like exterior circulation and public green space, and so I've implemented these into the project. This housing project features 61 homes of varied size, and they're arranged in 4 buildings. The footprint of the project is not only smaller than the combined existing houses, but with 60 homes in 1 block, the density of living is substantially increased. The spatial concept is inspired by the Roman way of dividing cities. They featured 2 main avenues, the Cardo and Decimanus, which were the axes of the city. And these streets were generally lined with shops, and they served as a hub for the citizens. In the same way, this project is divided by 2 pedestrian paths with communal spaces along the main procession. 3 of these blocks feature housing, but 1 is reserved as a park in keeping with the mission of the project. 5 common spaces on the ground floor line the main axes and feature public access facing the street, while common spaces for residents face the interior. 2 of the buildings are arranged around central green spaces that are recessed to increase privacy of surrounding home units. At the west entry, a daycare facility connects to a playground that is recessed below the main avenue. At the core of the project and facing the park is a common dining room and kitchen. And while set between the coffee shop and the restaurant is a market or retail space. The 2nd and 3rd floors are almost entirely residential. The common spaces on these floors are resident access only, and they serve as common lounges and patios. The 3rd floor features a rooftop pool, which overlooks the project and park. In order to minimize facade in the residential area, the only building with a 4th level is central to the project. This keeps the experience local and a smaller scale. While access to the community is not gated, wide main avenues invite pedestrians, while smaller circulation paths deter wandering to personal homes. Ultimately, the project prioritizes exterior space, and so interior space is as minimal as possible. From right to left in this section shows the 2 exercise rooms and the pool above, the main dining room, and then the market. Residents access their units through an outdoor stair elevator core, which exits onto elevated patios. A trellis connects the common exercise rooms to the dining space and acts as a visual bridge between them. Four-story building features high connectivity. The units above connect to the dining and retail spaces below via the exterior corridors. To increase privacy, windows facing the corridor are above eye level, and a void with greenery below keeps those walking by at a distance.
Can I interrupt really quickly, Vivian?
Yes.
There's this great suggestion in the chat that you might not have seen. It helps if you can use your cursor on the screen to help point to what you're talking about within each drawing.
Oh, sure.
These are extraordinary drawings with lots of information and detail, and if you can just help cue us into the thing you're wanting us to see, it would be a big help.
Absolutely. Do you need me to go back?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Here, the aerial breezeways connect two buildings, giving residents of the larger building quick access to the rooftop pool. A sloping interior lawn increases privacy to the units, but it's still accessible to pedestrians. This animation shows the distribution of units and their capacities. There's 22 three-bedroom units, 18 two-bedroom units, and 21 one-bedroom units. The one-bedroom units are 650 square feet and 750 square feet, and they're comfortable for 1 to 2 people. The two-bedroom unit's about 1,000 square feet, and it's comfortable for a family of 2 or 3. While the three-bedroom unit is about 1,300 square feet, and it's comfortable for a family of 3 to 4 people. The one-bedroom program, it's well suited to the narrower buildings, while the 2 and 3 bedrooms extend further into the landscape. The three-bedroom, oh, I'm sorry, went back up. For the experience of the community is largely influenced by its materiality, and so it would be made mainly of wood and other natural materials. Due to the versatility of its design, it's perfect for both old and young residents. The Axis design makes the project walkable and inviting, which fosters community and encourages socialization. The wooden architecture blends into the natural setting of New Orleans, and the increased outdoor space and greenery truly maximize the outdoor experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Maybe you can go to another drawing or...
Sure. Go to, let's think.
So Carmen, Scott, Lola, you got the floor.
Maybe just thank you for that. That was very clear and super elegant, clear drawings as well. Just a point of clarification, and I apologize, it might be because I'm coming in only in the afternoon, but the 3 or 4, I guess, or maybe even 5 existing buildings on the site, are you required to keep them, or was that a choice? And what is in them programmatically?
So I guess this wasn't explained in the beginning. They're actually left on the site, and so our mission was really just to work around them on the site and just try to not encroach on their space and try to figure out a way to find a barrier between the existing buildings
and are they all residential buildings, or are they?
So 2 of them are one is French Truck Coffee and the other is the steakhouse, but then there's one existing building that's just a residential home, and that's the one that's closest to the north-south axis here.
I see, the one that's in the bottom left-ish.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Did these buildings, I'm trying to investigate the public identity of these buildings. I think there's something happening here which is interesting, and I'm curious about it. You're creating 2 pedestrian streets through the middle of the project. That's not unprecedented with housing schemes of this size. And the ambition to form a collective by the intersection of 2 pedestrian streets at a kind of forum, if you will, to borrow from your analogy, is I think probably pretty interesting. These are sometimes referred to as a paseo in housing projects of the recent past. But then also the buildings address the actual street out in front of them. And I'm thinking that right here, I kind of see an identity to the building to the street. But over here, I think I'm getting the side of your building as it approaches the street, and that one would enter it, further down in the middle, or maybe even from the paseo on the other end, and that all that we get on the street is sort of the blank party wall edge of a of a motel kind of building. And that's not unprecedented in New Orleans either, but it is usually kind of disappointing. There were a number of low cost, what were called scatter site public housing projects that inserted this number of apartment units. And the buildings ultimately were kind of like the size of a shotgun house. And so they were thought to be somehow consistent with the context in their scale. But since a shotgun opens directly onto the street, and this one actually works completely differently in terms of bringing people back to the middle to enter, it really, I think, it creates a realm here that I could describe as civic and shared and common, but it creates it undermines a realm out here that was formerly the civic and shared space. So I guess this building seems successful in both of those ways, that I can have an identity to the street. My building participates in the creation of street life in New Orleans, which is of crucial importance. And it probably helped to see the rest of the context over here too. Or I can go into the project deeper on your Cardo or Decumanus and understand the building as an internal environment that's open principally to the occupants of the housing project. So that I think is where your project's at its strongest, and maybe at its weakest here, where you really kind of give the cold shoulder to the street and the immediate context. I can't tell exactly what's going on with this building, and this one, I'm suspicious that it gives an even larger blank or non-penetrable facade to the street edge. So I guess the strategy you propose is exciting to me. I like that interior pedestrian realm. It seems like a place that's safe and shared by this larger community, but I wonder how successful your buildings are at addressing both an existing social paradigm based on the streets of New Orleans and its porches and culture, and your new internal paradigm simultaneously.
Thank you, that's a good note. So actually, I addressed sort of the outside street. I took it as sort of a opportunity to create a porch for the residents by giving them a balcony that faces the street. And so it was sort of that concept that led me to keep these sort of so close to the street and facing the street in that way.
Are there porches on this one that I was not understanding?
Yes, I guess that's not clear enough. I'm sorry. I can move on.
Good, because I see them here. And these look like they would work well to animate life on the street, but this one doesn't look that way to me. I must have misunderstood.
Oh, I think, I'm sorry, I don't know which one you're referring to on the.
Can you see my marks? I see porches there where my circle just appeared.
Oh, okay, yes. So there are porches there, but
what about here?
And right. My apologies. I'm in a presenter view, and so I think the marks are showing up in a different space.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But I think you're right, Scott. Sorry
Okay.
that
I'm sorry. This is.
I jump in, but as Vivian cannot see your marks.
Oh, okay.
I think that it's really appropriate and it's a really valuable feedback.
Thank you.
I have just a general question about the overall project. were you guys asked to also consider kind of modes of transportation and how people access the site? Like I noticed there's no parking or thinking about things like that. Was that part of the brief at all?
So we didn't address parking. They sort of told us that like we didn't have to incorporate parking because there would be parking on the streets on the outside, and just sort of assumed that these people would park elsewhere. There might be another parking garage.
Yeah.
It wasn't really dealt with this project.
Okay. Well, I do want to compliment you. I'm always really impressed at how kind of mature and capable second year students are by the end of their year in making these really like detailed drawings that are employing lots of professional standards and care and rigor, and then also doing conceptual thinking and, you know, provocations for how we can live better in the world. And so I do want to compliment you for doing all of those things so well. I had one kind of reaction to your reference to the Roman organization of streets, and part of this is probably more about what my own thinking right now, but I am trying myself to be much more aware of my references to cultures that were potentially about like imperialism and oppression and like hostile takeovers of other cultures. So it just kind of jumped out at me as one of those types of situations. And so I wonder if, instead of referring to it that way, if what you are interested in is somehow like orienting this project, you're calling it out as east, west, north, south. So in that way, like orienting to the sun and orienting to kind of cardinal directions of the earth. And in terms of kind of turning the project into quadrants with this forum or a plaza space or public gathering space, I just wonder if you might want to use language that is maybe less culturally, has less cultural baggage and actually allows you to articulate the specific aspects of those ways of thinking about how you might organize that could be appreciated as kind of more universal things that in this case might be about the sun and the earth, and about kind of a way of at the intersection of those things carving out kind of shared community space or something like that. So just kind of something that I noticed. And then I also wondered, I could have missed it. It did go, the presentations did go very quickly, but I wondered if you had kind of a conceptual approach to the mixing of, Margarita described it as diversifying income, so providing a variety of unit sizes. I wondered if you had kind of a conceptual approach to the mixing of those things, and then the relationship of the variety of units to each other and to the public spaces and to the city streets, and if that was an area of some kind of potential innovation or a bit of just creating a narrative about how diversity enriches a place or causes some kind of architectural response.
Right. So we didn't address cost of living in this. There's no budget. There wasn't really sort of an idea of how much these units would cost. But I guess thinking about it in that way, the majority of the units are one bedrooms and they're roughly 600 square feet. So in New Orleans, I would imagine that wouldn't be a very high cost of living. And so I think that if there were families who wanted to live in this place, and considering the square footage relatively small, it would be a pretty affordable place to live. And I think that it would be economical for the city and really wouldn't have any barriers for anyone.
Did you want to follow up, Carmen, or?
No, you can go ahead.
I mean, I think these are all really great questions. And I mean, I want to say, I'm trying to both listen and look at your floor plans, but I, you know, often you know, it's hard to do this scale because you're both like doing urban design and building design and then unit plans. And often, I know in my experience teaching housing, you're kind of like, oh God, don't look at the unit plans. And I will say that actually your unit plans seem to really work and produce a kind of range of spatial configurations and so forth. So I want to commend you on that. And really, as Carmen said, on the quality of the drawings. I mean, maybe coming back to Scott's comments, and I think this is hard, you know, it's hard in second year to be thinking about some of the urban questions because you're just grappling with so much. But I think it would be interesting both to think about the urban address he mentioned, but also the nature of the courtyards you're creating. And because it's interesting, I'm looking at the one that has the house right in the middle, right? And it's interesting, your views, which are quite lovely, rarely show the existing buildings. Which would start to kind of force you maybe to confront like, ooh, what is it like to be right next to the steakhouse or the backside of the steakhouse, which is probably even less attractive. But especially the one like with the house in it, you suddenly start to wonder, well, what's the nature of that courtyard, right? Like both, what is it like to have a courtyard where suddenly there's a private residence right in the middle? And also for the person who owns that house, what is it like to suddenly have 20 apartments or 15 apartments looking in at them? And so I think there's interesting kind of questions of how you mediate, and it might be landscape, it might be slight sectional changes, it might be ideas of kind of fences, and maybe coming back to Carmen's point about you know, one's references. I mean, one of the things I was blown away when I visited New Orleans last year, or I guess a year and a half ago now. And there are, I mean, it's has so many distinct typologies, and there are these kind of gated gardens that often are in front of the houses. And so I think you could start to think about the open spaces as much as the buildings, and which ones are gated, which ones are completely open. And this might also speak to Carmen's question of like the demographics, right? Some might be more urban, some might be designed might be, I don't want to say gated, but somehow protected so that children could go down and play. And that might be through section or any number of things that kind of define a sort of territory of collective domesticity. And I think thinking about how the walkways can also participate in that. Can someone sit, you know, do the walkways actually need to be even more generous? So someone can be, you know, I don't know, on their laptop on the 3rd floor and know my 5-year-old or 8-year-old's downstairs, and or I'm doing, you know, so that, I mean, it's the age-old question of like Jane Jacobs' eyes on the street, or, you know, eyes on the courtyard in this case. So, I mean, I think the project is super interesting in that it raises these questions, and it could, you know, there's room to evolve, you know, because there's just so many things to think about. I think the last thing also is, what is the relationship between the I'll call them 3 buildings or 3 courtyards, right? Does one start to see them as 3 buildings that are kind of independent but happen to be on the same block? Are there, I mean, I guess you've got connective links between the 2 ones that are kind of on the bottom of the screen. But so, I mean, there's interesting questions of how distinct are the 3, whether it's in terms of demographics, in terms of their courtyards, et cetera, which would allow, you know, perhaps like evolution, subtle design evolutions. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. I know we're short on time.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vivian, and all the reviewers for your valuable feedback. We have still like 1 minute if anyone wants to jump in. If not, I will just leave, and and there will be another instructor here really briefly. I don't know if anyone wants to make a final comment.
I was just hoping we could go backwards through the drawings a little further, because we're not looking at the most beautiful drawing, just the most helpful for making my point. But
is there a particular drawing you'd like to see?
Oh, maybe some of those unit details that you were showing. There's some very careful planning and development of this project, and I'm just delighted to see what you've produced here. Yeah, that's terrific. I think you guys really ran the gamut of issues, as has been mentioned, that and it's impressive to see you engaging the project on so many levels at once in your 4th semester of school. So that's great. There's even a level of tectonic believability to what you're doing, which is impressive.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vivian. You can even like show us a little more, but I'm gonna leave the floor for the next instructor, and thank you very much. I will see you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Guillermo.
And Vivian, remember that now you're the timekeeper.
Okay.
So, and thank you very much for doing that job for all of us.
Can I ask, like, how long do I have any time left, or is it ended already?
Sorry?
I don't know how much time I took up because I wasn't timing it. So.
I think it was 6 minutes and a half, so it was on time. Your presentation, you mean?
Oh no, I was just wondering if my time allotted for now was over.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much. I'll see you later.
Thank you so much.
I think it's interesting, as you know, I'm guessing there will be a kind of more urban type studio somewhere along the undergrad curriculum. And I think the kind of detail that you show in the housing units, it would be really interesting to start to think, could you draw the whole site plan with that level? Like, because immediately when you said there was a steakhouse, I'm like, well, there's going to be trucks and there's going to be garbage cans and all the things that one never wants to think about as a designer. And I mean, they gave you a tough challenge to, all of you, to keep those existing buildings because there's a lot, in reality, there's a lot of interfaces. And so I think, what I love about your drawings is you clearly have the skill. And so you could keep carrying that into, where do bikes park? Where do cars go? Where do trucks deliver to the coffee house or the steakhouse? Where's the messiness that we don't draw? And if you could draw the ugly stuff as beautifully as you draw the beautiful stuff that you're controlling, I think then in future studios, the kind of, once you start to draw the things the first act is kind of drawing, and then you can kind of think through it. So I think if you drew the back of the steakhouse, suddenly one would come up with a design solution. This is way beyond second year, so this is, but I'm maybe an encouragement to keep using your drawing skills.
It's great to hear you describe that, because the next studio for these students is a 3rd year fall where they explore the urban dimensions of design, and they're designing at the scale of several blocks rather than a single building. And that several block scale will ask them to take the lessons of unit development that they saw here and scale those up to the kinds of development of urban space as well. So it's almost like what's in our curriculum next. So that was great segue. And it's probably the weakness of this project I shouldn't say weakness, it's the part that our students are least familiar with, but that dabbling with and finding out about now equips them to explore in greater depth in the fall of 3rd year.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And then the spring of 3rd year is their comprehensive or integrated project, where they try and pull every lesson they've ever heard together in one building.
Got it.
That's when we have ours too at Cal Poly, is the spring of 3rd year.
Yeah.
We're on quarters, so we do a double quarter, a winter, spring double quarter.
That's great.
Yeah.
Does a double quarter end up being more than a 14-week semester?
Yeah, a quarter is 10 weeks, so then I guess they get 20.
Wow.
But
Interrupt, but we should probably continue.
Oh, sorry. Let's go.
Anjali, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Let me share my screen.
Excellent. Take it away.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Anjali Anand, and I am a second year undergraduate in Carrie Nortman's section. Oops. Are you seeing the presentation right now?
Yes.
Is it on the right slide?
It's on the title slide. Your name?
Let's see. Unfortunately, I think I'm on a different document. Would you mind if I stop share and reshare?
Yep. Try again.
There we go. Okay. The name of the Urban Block Aggregation Project is Collective Courtyards. The use of courtyards and porosity between indoor and outdoor spaces has been a common thread throughout the semester, stemming from the designs of the horizontal, vertical, and sectional homes. While the homes themselves served as inspiration for the units, the strongest connection made was through the different programmatic uses and experiences of outdoor spaces and how they interact with each other. So this can be seen in my horizontal home through the courtyards of different programmatic.
Anjali, just a heads up, we still only see the first slide.
I am sharing screen. I don't know why it's not working.
Let's try one more time. We may need to jump to concept board if the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I apologize. I have it up and it's been working in the past. So
Anjali, where in the concept board are you located?
I am on
Control F.
row.
Type in the name, then it'll bring you right to her.
Okay. Sweet.
Let's see. Yeah, apologies for the technical issues. I usually don't have this issue with this computer.
It sounds like somebody got a table near the kitchen or something here.
Yeah, I'm right by the door opening studio. I am trying to reopen my presentation and see if it works.
Okay, the other possibility is if it's PDF and if it was derived from InDesign, you could potentially go to presentation mode in InDesign and advance the pages in there as well.
I don't have it on my Mac, which is where I'm presenting,
but the PDF should work.
Harry, what row did you say it was on?
Sorry, say that again.
On what row is it on in the, what is
The
it?
last row.
Last row, okay, thanks.
And if you hit Control F or Command F, if you're on a Mac, and you type in the student's name, it'll bring you right to their location.
Can you see the screen changing
Yes.
now? Okay, good. I don't know what the issue was. Okay. Shall I restart? Okay. I believe it was the use of the courtyards. Okay, the use of the courtyards and porosity between indoor and outdoor spaces has been a common thread throughout the semester, stemming from the designs of the horizontal, vertical, and sectional homes. While the homes themselves served as inspiration for the units, the strongest connection was through the different programmatic spaces and uses of outdoor spaces and how they interact with each other. And this can be seen in the horizontal house with the central courtyards and private courtyards. In the vertical home through the use of vegetation. And the sectional house with the different cantilevers and views from different terraces. Precedent that served as an inspiration for the earliest iteration of this aggregation was MRDV's housing complex in the Netherlands. The cantilevers seem to offer a similar experience as the sectional home with the different views from different angles of the facade. I used the same strategy, but inverted it, essentially pushing the terraces in. The urban block serves as a multi-generational community for artists and creatives. The programmatic, public, and collective spaces are geared to meet the needs of the community and reflect personality aesthetically. The buildings themselves fall under the structure of the linear open block with the body of the building elevated above the ground, anchored by circulational stair cores. And in this first diagram, you see the large arrows serve as an entrance from the street, while the smaller arrows show the circulation, the entrances into the building within the block. The idea of courtyards with different functions was taken to a macro level, with plazas taking on different identities, such as like recreation, cafe, leisure, privacy, urban jungle and forest, and this intersection in the center. These identities create different crowd densities and levels of engagement within the community. On the diagram on the left, the darkness, the shade of the color represents the more public areas, while the lighter tones represent a more private area. On the diagram on the right, the different facades are shown with the different engagements. So the dark purple shows the more public side, which is, shows the more private side, which has a more public engagement from the interior, whereas the lighter blocks represent the more private spaces when faced with the street. So, for example, a very public area would be this promenade in the center, and the boxes show where you want more privacy, and that's flipped onto the street as well. In the diagram on the left, they're shown the highlighted public spaces, so areas where people can meet from the street, whereas on the right are shown the more collective community spaces just for the residents. This is the ground floor plan, which shows the different identities of these public spaces in more resolution. And vegetation plays a big role in the amount of privacy and density of crowds. And the personality of the community is shown through that main promenade, which serves programmatic function and also sculptural function, with a sculpture garden, a stage, a skate park, fountains, which can all serve as art in themselves. This is a typical floor plan that shows the different aggregation of units and their access to this circulational stair cores, as well as the collective community spaces. These are the units that, that are highlighted in one of the buildings to show context. There's a large unit, a duplex, and a smaller unit. And most of these units offer a very similar experience. And what really defines them is their location and how they interact with the street and the courtyards.
You have 1 minute.
So as for experience, I'll walk you through some perspectives. This is a view of the cafe courtyard. This would be the main promenade with the skate park and the fountains. And then this is a sectional view of that same perspective. This would be entering from the outside into the more dense urban jungle. And as for facade, these were some precedents that I used to define the thresholds that were visible from the outside. I did also view these from inside out. So this is a series of elevations with markings for terraces and circulational cores and windows. So as you can see, the units fit perfectly into each of these levels, and each terrace is given a certain number of openings to let light in. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Could you take us back to an upper level overall plan?
Anjali, perhaps the resolution is better in concept word.
Yeah, it might be. If you zoom in.
Since we're here, I'll just make a quick point if I may, and then we could jump to a different strategy. But I'm thinking that, and this is, I'm sorry to say, just kind of borrowing on my comments from the previous project, but it looks like if you took this unit here on the corner and rotated it 90 degrees so that the balcony piece was here, like that, that balcony piece would have an identity into your project like all the other balconies, but it would also have a relationship out toward the street, and that the fenestration patterns that you've built looking into the project could look out to the street. And you could still, I think, load and use the unit in the same ways, but it would have a kind of way of belonging to both the internal environment that you're constructing for the project and the existing environment of a street. It would be a pity to come along and build a new territory with its own internal environment, which is wonderful, but to do so in such a way that it undermined what is, for most New Orleanians, the primary civic territory that's open to everyone, even weirdos. And being out there on that kind of zone makes it accessible and have an identity to this project. It even is part of a way of negotiating the line between one environment and the other. I think we have an idealistic, ambitious sense that well-behaved citizens can be allowed to wander right into our project. But really, it's kind of nice to have a kind of point of observational control about who's coming in and what they're doing, and when they're in and when they're out. And I think that ultimately, I'm sorry, my scribbles are destroying your beautiful drawing. But that ultimately strengthens the identity of a project to the exterior world. And it also strengthens this sense of observation in the transition zone between the two realms of the real public and the sort of private public or semi-public territories that we make inside the project. There's a frustrating fact of our 20th century or 21st century culture that a territory like this might be nominally connected to the street and the sidewalk out in front, but things that happen here are become responsibilities borne by the owner of the property, and things that happen here are not. And so we always want to make a kind of line between the two, and then work as architects to make that line seem benign, and make it function kind of simply and organically, but still acknowledge the difference in those conditions. And again, I know that's not been a concentration of your studio work, and I am delighted to acknowledge the extraordinary achievement of combining all of these components so believably and working so well. And we've been talking about how next semester you would take the energy that goes into developing this level of clarity and precision and begin devoting it to territories that happen outside projects, which are also of urgent need of that kind of subtle development.
I like that point. I actually thought of it when you were mentioning that in Vivian's project.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Lola.
I can wait. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. We don't have to go in the same order every time.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I like a lot the sort of site strategy, and the kind of massing and so forth. Can we go back to the ground floor plan? I'm a little less convinced of the ground floor plan, to be honest. Partly, I mean, for a sort of number of interrelated reasons, you effectively have a lot of basically fire stairs coming down, and that's sort of the only thing that registers on the ground plan. And I think it might be a problem for a number of reasons. I mean, one, I think to activate the public space that you're creating, or even the collective space, you may want to have some program that sort of activates it. Whether it's a daycare or even a laundry room, or you talked about a recreation zone. So I don't know if there's a kind of piece of program that somehow relates to that, and then maybe I'll go back. I'm gonna pull up your diagram. Anyways, you could think of at least one anchor program for each of your 3 different courtyard types. And I like that you're sort of thinking about each one having a different character. I think that's really smart. I also think but I think that you want a kind of some program beyond just the stairs. I also think, I mean, I just taught a housing studio lab 2 semesters ago, and I kept joking with my students, like, where does the pizza person deliver the pizza? And you can sort of imagine the scenario of, like, I am the 5th door on, I mean, you could number them. I'm half joking, but I think this question is sort of public address and sort of arriving. And so I don't know if it's about, I mean, it would affect the circulation. I recognize that. Or maybe sometimes two of your stair cores are linked by a public program. So you arrive first in a lobby plus something, and then you go into your different stairs. But I think there's the relationship of program to open space is really key in terms of both ensuring the public space is active, but also ensuring there's a kind of public address to the, you know, whether it's to the street or to your own courtyards. And I imagine, I mean, everything is quite rigid. It's interesting, like the plan is kind of rigid, which I don't mind at all. And then even your recreational landscape is pretty rigid. It's also subdivided into these sort of squares, and then your piers that form circulation are also pretty rigid. And I wonder if some of this public program could start to break out. Like, does it take on a whole other geometry, almost like pavilions that have sort of slipped under the kind of bar logic? I'm thinking of like some of, I don't know, Corb's projects in Brazil, in the Pavillon de, the Brazilian pavilion in Paris, or any, I mean, there's a number of projects that would start to kind of loosen the plan up maybe also. Anyways, I'll leave it there, and I want to let others speak, but very nice otherwise.
On the note of collective space on the first floor, I do have it, it's on the edges of the street, so to engage more with the public, but I do agree that I could incorporate more of that within the interior of that plan. And I also, it was my intention to leave some of the spaces empty below the building to like, to make the environment more porous, since it already has such a strong structure to it, to allow people to roam freely.
For sure. And I think in your, like, we can't do this in Toronto, but I think definitely in your climate, in the climate of New Orleans, you can have these sort of covered ground floor portions. But I think there's a kind of balance where, or it needs to be even more open, right? Like you'd almost want to get rid of some of those stair units descending so that you could really have like very large covered open spaces maybe.
Hi, Anjali. I had the same kind of reaction. My eye immediately went to those stair towers as being kind of the most dominant form on the ground floor. And also, maybe less important, but the quantity of elevators and kind of the quantity of material and mass that's dedicated to that vertical circulation, just feeling like, could those things actually do more for you in the project? Could you conceptualize them more as like cul-de-sacs or something with clusters of families who collect around that cul-de-sac, and then the cul-de-sac is part of a larger network of spaces that you can explore on the ground floor? I just think right now, like kind of the material consumption and the presence of those stair circulation elements doesn't match the benefit that you're getting out of them in the project in terms of either experience, in terms of how they contribute to community, in terms of how they help to actually create a connection between the ground level and the unit level. Thinking of them as kind of a threshold experience, how someone arrives to home and leaves home. The way they're represented right now feels very kind of emergency exit stair. And maybe that's not your intention, but they're rendered with, you know, thick, opaque walls. So no porosity between the outside and the inside, and kind of a single door where maybe I imagine like only the person with the key can get in there. On that same point, just, I think this is probably more of a drawing thing than how you're conceptualizing it, but when you talked about those public spaces on the ground floor that are at the ends of the bars, they are also drawn as very thick and heavy, and no indication of where you would have kind of openness and transparency between the interior of those spaces and all of your new kind of wonderful outdoor spaces and also to the street. So I would just be a little bit more careful with how you're rendering those things in plan. I really appreciated how clear you presented the project in terms of a very clear concept statement, your diagrams of walking us through the way you were thinking about the different elements. I thought the development of the outdoor spaces, really giving each space an identity, was really done quite well. I also had the reaction of like on the ground floor, these kind of, I think that they are kind of dark spaces where you have just some bike racks that that they seem really underutilized. And the one that to me is like the most obvious is the skateboarding program, where one of those spaces or multiple spaces, they seem very well suited to skateboarding. And so even just starting to kind of think sectionally of that ground plane as something that the skateboarding ramp like weaves below the main pedestrian walkway and comes into that space that's beneath an adjacent unit or something. I think you could start to weave things together in a way that might be a bit more dynamic and really utilize what I think you're kind of underutilizing that space and under programming it. And there's kind of a homogeneity in the project in those spaces with the stair tower and then all of those undergrounds or spaces that are covered by the tower above. I also should have said that the project is really beautifully drawn and detailed and really exciting in many ways.
Thank you.
In our enthusiasm to talk about your project, I think we often forget to mention how terrific it is. So I appreciate that, Carmen. Yeah, this is really another beautifully drawn, elegantly presented, clearly described project. So these are the crucial skills, regardless of the foibles of ground level space and so forth.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to peel away, and you're now joined by Professor Jobert. And thank you so much for the comments. Thank you, Anjali. It was a pleasure to teach you all semester, and I wish you the best moving forward.
Thank you.
Oh, look, Margarita's here already.
Hello, how are you? Just came in.
You've got your Tulane School of Architecture sign turned around facing the right way now. I'm
Oh, it took me a while. Okay, so I think next is Esther, maybe? No? So you can share screen. Who is the host in this room? Vivian, perfect. You're the boss. So you're making co-host everyone, right? You can make co-host Esther so she can.
Okay, can I share my screen now?
Wait. I think Vivian is making your co-host because
Okay.
Vivian is the host. If you open participants, you will see a column of names, and then you put the cursor on the camera, and then you'll have the option of making host, co-host, and all that. Like co-host. Yeah. I cannot hear you. Yeah. Now. Thank you, Vivian, for taking that. Yes. Yes. Esther, you should be able then to jump in. The grad student, you can perhaps tell about your undergrad background to have a better picture of where you come from.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Esther Zulen. I am first year graduate student, part of Margarita's section. My background is in finance and management. The last program I taken was at NYU, Eastern Business School. I am from Peru, and my undergrad was in San Ignacio Loyola in Lima, Peru, in finance and management too. Okay, the name of my project, is University Village. This is an isometric south view and the surroundings. This is part of the horizontal home. I reuse main ideas and concepts of the horizontal homes from the University Village, as well for the vertical house and the sectional too. The sectional was it is part of the small units of my project, of the project. Okay, this is the porch study we developed from Palmer Avenue. All the intentional community project is considering the importance of balconies and porches in New Orleans. About the site, helps to define how to building blocks, how can be distributed, and with opportunity to choose a place where to consider the block with the highest height. As a precedent for the University Village project, I consider L-shape and linear blocks. Also, taking some ideas from Joseph Louis Serre, who defined modern Boston and had worked in the Harvard housing, Peabody Terrace. He worked with many elements, mixed use program, and aesthetic design for this project. The idea of the University Village program arises because of experience as family, especially graduate students have. They want a space close to Tulane University and located in uptown area in New Orleans. Many international students come to New Orleans with families, especially PhD, MBAs, and master students. The project considers 6 building blocks with mixed units distributed throughout the complex. The publics and collectives are defined in the diagram here. The diagram shows better the distribution of the collective circulation and public spaces. This is part of the level 2. Between the level 2 and level 5, we have all the housings. We have the diagrams for the exciting trees and the new ones and the keeped one too that are darker. This is the idea of the typologies. We have a total of 69 units divided in the 6 blocks. The diagram unit shows us the total unit of the project, where large units are located in block 1, 2, and 3. And the medium and small units are around all the blocks. This is a section of Baron Street view that show better how the balconies are seeing some for to the street and the other ones inside the complex. This is the typology of units. The large units is 1 story. The type 2 is 2 story. And the type 3 is the small one as a studio living, 1 story too. This is the typology form and how the type 1 and type 3 is working in the complex as a mixed use program. Okay, this perspective view reflects outdoor activities inside a complex with southeast view. The view of the complex of outside, southeast view too at the same time. And the other view that I have is northeast view that is inside a complex from a balcony. Okay, that's it.
Esther, can you go back to a good image for us to start with?
Okay.
One that you think really captures the essence of the project?
I think this section could be nice. Not sure, or the ground floor or something.
Is well, I told myself I wasn't going to start again, so maybe I'll pinch my lips together for a few seconds here.
Maybe I'll just ask a clarification question, and then Scott, you can start, but I will have broken the ice. Did you say this was student housing or not specifically?
Yes, but for grad students as a PhDs, master or MBA program. Yeah, sometimes, for example, it is my experience when some international students come to New Orleans, always are looking for some good apartments to live because houses here are beautiful, but at the same time are old houses. And the idea is that the people that is living in this complex is the same owners of the actual properties of the place, as well for some renting spaces. All the first level, the ground floor, as we can see here, is considered as a public and collective spaces that will help to the maintenance of the building. I consider that stores that are around this first level are getting the 2% of the sales as income for the complex. Also, we have like a business and social rooms and co-working spaces for rent.
Okay, thank you.
If you could step back to the elevation you were showing us a moment ago, I have a little question too. I think I know the answer, but are these walls along here, along the bottom of the building, is that entirely unfenestrated?
No, I will have doors and openings for the public spaces. I didn't put that. I only consider the materiality that I am planning to use for part of the project. But it's like allow me to go back. It will be this Baron Street, and we have entrance for the units, the Independence, and clear green. It's like a public space.
Well, maybe the plan is the better view for me to understand. I'm trying to understand those spaces at the bottom because I think they have the potential to cross over the line, which is my my obsession in this review, apparently, is the relationship between the project to the street versus the project to its internal environment. And most people seem to be putting a great deal of emphasis on the relationship of their housing proposal to its own internal mid-block environment, but less emphasis on how the project addresses the street. And so maybe, could you go back to that plan you showed us, a ground level plan?
Ground level.
And I don't see any openings here to understand.
Yeah, I didn't consider for the plan.
Okay.
It will be nice for review and pull the doors. I only consider as a diagram.
But you see it, you see it as operable, right, from both sides?
Not necessarily, only, for example, there are public indoor, the public spaces that this is, it will be, let me check.
So all of these are commercial spaces?
It will be mini market, that place. Mini market, this is business, this is the business and social room from the side that you are mentioning. And the other place is like a mini stores. The idea of having here in this part public spaces is that we have in front of this site, we have the school, and it will be nice because the idea is of receiving some incomes and having some revenues for the same buildings, because every store, the owners of the building can receive like a 2% of the sales every month for these spaces. The yellow rooms are part of the collective, that it will be with doors inside, and the clear green will be for public spaces with doors outside.
Okay. Okay. It's the first of the projects we've looked at that's taken a strategy, that kind of strategy with those ground level spaces, and that they operate externally using the existing system of sidewalk, is interesting. It begs the question of what happens on the inside then. And if these are double fronted, two-sided kinds of spaces, if they have programs in them that function as a pass through and as a transition from the semi-public interior realm to the public exterior realm. So all these are interesting questions, and I think your project engages them differently than the previous schemes, but we need a little bit more information to be able to understand how they might work. And by a little bit more information, some of the simplest things to add would be some indication of transparency versus opacity, and the presence of doors opening in and out. So we see access and transparency versus opacity. And those two ingredients can really go a long way to understanding how that might work.
Okay, yeah, I have to improve this part. I think it will be nice to consider the door spaces. It is important. I have to work in that. Thank you, Professor.
And what's happening right here?
Where this is a retention water site that is to consider as it's open space, but at the same time we consider like a space for fontaine, as well as a retention water system in this part, because the idea is to maintain the privacy of the people that is living in this place.
Okay, so you get your feet wet if you walked across there.
Yeah,
okay.
The people outside can cross this place. At the same in Drivers Street, we have another one. I consider 4 of them, like to create an open space, but at the same time have the privacy of the spaces too.
Okay. All right, well, that helps me understand the project better. And I think some of those are things that can come forward graphically so that we can read those just really quickly rather than need explanation. Or if it's too small a scale to develop them here, then maybe there's a zoomed in scale of a piece of the project that gets us closer to that and lets us see that detail, and we can extrapolate from that to the rest of the proposal. Well, it's been mentioned before, but I don't mind mentioning again that there's some improbability to large numbers of core pieces that each have their own elevator. That often gets prohibitively expensive to both build and maintain. And it might be more likely to produce stairs that access many of these and then elevators that just access some. Then of course we run into ADA limitations there, and that's why systems of general communication between units are often more common here. There are some schemes and some code understandings that would allow us to eliminate some of those elevators, but they may not touch on the most generous interpretation of ADA's systems.
Yeah, I have to consider that, but if we make a small calculation about renting the space of large, medium, and small unit, the cost of living is about $1,500 that we have paid for rent in New Orleans for a large unit, and for the small one is between 800 and 600. And if we consider the 2% of the spaces that are stores that have to give the complex 2% of their sales every month, we have about like almost 1 million to be pessimist about that, that they can receive, they could receive like every month. That I am not sure if how is the price of the maintenance of the elevator. I don't have information of that, but here, that's why I consider that. But it would be nice to consider that. But at the same time, that is for, it is like 4 levels, almost feet, considering that the first floor is used for public and collective. Perhaps it will be nice to have an elevator just in case, but I am not against your recommendation because it will be nice to consider, and it's the first time that I am making a bit complex. I was dying with all this project at the same time, and I am the headache of Margarita because yeah. I changed my project many times. I have to learn obviously more about line works at the same time. Everything is new for me, including the terminology, the architecture terminology. Yeah. Perhaps if you talk with me about finance, it will be nice, but now
Esther, you need to give some space of time to our reviewers to comment. So perhaps there's a way of just listening.
Yeah, it's okay to do the elevator strategy that you've done. It's not a wrong thing. It's just we're trying to point out that it comes with a problem. There's another side to it, which is that that's a lot of expense in a scheme, but it isn't wrong.
I'm making an observation now that I've seen 3 of these projects. I wasn't here in the morning. Something about the question of aggregation, that I believe the methodology in the studio was to design the units first, and then you go through a process of aggregation. And so what I'm observing in this strategy that produces a lot of cores is somehow the byproduct of that process, right? Designing the units and you actually have duplex units, so double height units. I think the earlier projects had primarily single story units, but you have double story units. So I would encourage all of you as you continue to work and develop more skills, and I should have also started with my compliments again, like the drawings are so rich and detailed, and the success that you've achieved after just 1 year is really remarkable. So please take this comment along with the compliments. Anyway, I just would like to encourage you as you work forward. It's not uncommon to be in a place of thinking through aggregation of smaller components. And so I think what I'm seeing in the sectional explorations, the earlier sectional explorations, as you guys flip through them at lightning speed, I see much more experimentation with shifts, with pulling things out of plane, with inserting kind of pockets of voids. And so I would encourage, as you go to the larger, more holistic way of thinking of the whole building and aggregating at that scale, that you could also think sectionally about the overall building in the same way that you were able to think of that one unit with more of those shifts. And you do something here with bridging that we haven't really seen before. And just as kind of a quick little note over this, once you open up the potential for bridging, you can bridge here. Can you see my marks?
Yes.
So you can bridge here, and then one of these stairs and elevators goes away. You can bridge here, and then the same, right? Lose another one. And now, I made this comment earlier about, could you think of the stair courts almost as like cul-de-sacs? So they allow a small number of units to share some space together. It's the place where, you know, kids can play very close to the front door of their unit. It's the place where you smell the dinner cooking from the other people who live next door to you, where you feel somehow it's kind of it's a shared space, but it's shared by a small number of people with potentially a high level of trust and a high level of familiarity between those people. So that also asks the question of, does it want to be considered a bit more in terms of the design of that space? To function well. And so anyway, I think with your idea of bridging, now you can start to perhaps challenge your aggregation system to make more of those connections across buildings or across units, and start to kind of think more about the connectivity between the bars or the blocks.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just, I know we're running out of time. I mean, I think it's also interesting to think about the social life of your project. I mean, I would say this about each person. You know, I like that, I can't remember now, each of you have sort of demographics you're imagining. And so, and it's interesting that you said it's for master's students, PhD, and business students, because it reminded me of this. I was at in Boston at Harvard in grad school, and I lived in the Gropius dorms, which were pretty much jail cells, but they were very cheap, so it was great. And one day, the last week of term, I walked over to the business school, and I realized, like, this is an entirely different planet. Like, perfectly mowed lawns and beautifully maintained flowers. I mean, Harvard's hardly slumming it, but like the business school was like crossing into another world. And I say this humorously, but only to say, when I look at, and it comes back to maybe Scott's comment about what's happening on the ground floor, like I think thinking about how one curates community and what kind of community based on the program and who's viewing what. And I was a bit taken aback by the pool, because and it's not to say grad students aren't worthy of pools, but it had this sort of atmosphere of a kind of condo. You know, one doesn't see that in student housing very often. And then the fact that the ground floor is kind of in that same view, there's nothing looking onto that pool. It reminded me in Toronto, you get a lot of condos where there's parking and then the housing begins. And so the parking is basically a solid mass. And then you often have a pool to kind of, and you know, and even you've got the mini mart and the things, but those things are basically, if you've ever been into any store, you know that stores are not two-sided, right? Like there's a front side and then there's the back where the storage and trucks come in. And so maybe there's less, I wonder if there wants to be less commercial program, and you think about the front and back challenge, which is a complex thing. And I you know, it's kind of unfair to ask this, so maybe it's more food for thought. But I think thinking about what activates the ground floor and your courtyard, and I love that it's a kind of super courtyard, like in a way, you've got many buildings that form a single courtyard, which I think is really interesting conception. But then thinking about how that collective space is experienced, and maybe there are subspaces in terms of how it's landscaped. I was looking at the Peabody project as you were talking, because you invoked it, and they've got a children's center, and the ground floor is very porous on the Peabody Center. There's actually tons of little front doors, and so it feels very domestic. And so I think, thinking about what students want, they're actually, I always have a skepticism about communal living, but if anyone is willing to pursue the communal project, it is students. And so thinking about what, both on the upper floor plans, but particularly on the ground floor plan, what catalyzes that? Is there a gym, and then you can actually have an outdoor gym because you guys have such good weather that you could bring your yoga mats outside? Or is there a cafeteria and then you can eat outdoors? And so suddenly that ground floor becomes really dynamic. So anyways, things to think about, but very nice project.
Thank you.
Yeah, Esther, I don't know if I said it loud enough, but that's great progress you've made. I've seen the work you've done in previous studios, and you've just learned a ton. So I'm delighted. This is an impressive demonstration.
Thank you so much.
Okay. To the other reviewers and to all of the students, I have to run, I'm sorry to say, to another meeting, but it's been great to see this work, and I'm delighted to have been allowed, and I will rejoin you if at all possible after my horrible meeting. Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Scott.
Good to see you all.
Roshi, is it your turn?
Yeah, hi. I'm
Okay.
just gonna share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
So I'm Rosie Sonsolis is my professor in my second year undergrad. My project is called Floating Co-Housing. This is my axon. For influences, my horizontal home was the most influential in my project. I have a central outdoor space in the middle there, and then outside I have the program, and I use that. I mimicked that ventilation and cross ventilation with on a bigger scale with my aggregation project. The vertical home wasn't as influential, but I did use some aspects of it. And then the same thing with my sectional home. For the site observations, some pictures that I took at the site, obviously with New Orleans, with the heat and the sun, I wanted to take advantage of the light that's provided in the area, but also provide some shade so that it's not too hot because of the heat that we have here. This was the original other surrounding blocks in this at the site, and then this was my changes that I had made to it. As you can see, there's some you can see some of the moments of shade and the cantilevers that the buildings provide shade to the lower levels there in the axon. For my ground floor, that's mostly just amenities and public space so that it's an open area for other people can come and interact with the community, but they're not necessarily going into the private space that is the community, which is mostly on the majority of the amenity, or the units are on the first level there on the right.
Can I ask a quick question while we're on this slide? On the ground floor plan where we see the hatch that's gray horizontal lines, those are exterior spaces?
Yes, they're exterior spaces. That's just the the concrete. It's just to differentiate between the paths and the grass.
Okay.
And then those are my second and third level plans, which is they're pretty much pretty similar to that first level of units, but there is some variation just to provide that shade as I was talking about before. This is my east to west section. And this, I think that my sections best show the floating aspect of the project. And you can see how there's like these separate floating boxes there in the middle. And this is the second section from north to south. For my diagrams, this is my program diagram, just showing the difference in placement of pieces of program throughout the project. And then light. So I thought this one was most interesting because you can see the different places in orange there of all the places that the light doesn't hit that are provided shade. And circulation. All of the darker blue colors are all of the doors, so you can see how one would circulate throughout the build or throughout the floors. So this is one of my smaller typologies. It occurs 8 times. Everything's pretty packed in this one. As you can see, you walk into the like living room, kitchen area, and then the bedroom and bathroom are more private off to the side. And that's the same with, this is my other small typology building. For the medium typologies, I have the most of these ones. It's just for a like 3 or 4 size family house. You walk into the kitchen and dining room, sort of like the other one, but it's on a bigger scale. I have the bathroom and the children's bedrooms are separated from the rest of the, like from the center of the program, but the bathroom is still accessible from the, like right here is accessible from the public area of the house here. And similar setup, but just a little bit different arrangement here. And for the large typologies, this one's meant for like student housing or just like more people would probably sleep about like 4 to 8 technically, but there's a lot of common space in this one. And then this one's more of a family style setup for. This is one of my perspectives. It's on the second level, so you can see the ceiling above, but you can see that even though it's shaded there, there's still these moments over here and over here of light where there's some greenery integrated into that space, or yeah. Again, you can see the integration of the green here with open spaces up here. And this one. And then this one's from the ground level looking up, and it shows the floating house here, or the floating boxes here and kind of up here. And you can see these like gaps and voids here where the trees and green spaces show through. And this is the exploded axon showing each floor coming down. It just helps to show that like how everything's spread out on the first floor, and then as the unit floors come down, you can see that it's more dense. And that's it.
I'm just getting myself to the concept board also so I can see slightly higher resolution.
Yeah, maybe Rosie, you should share with us your concept board.
Yes.
And you can go as the reviewers ask you about which part they would like to see. And
yeah, I have to, let me pull up the concept board.
Because it's true that your quality in the PDF and the presentation was not really good.
That's been pretty consistent actually through the day. But
yeah, that all of the students have been a lot of problems with that. But yeah. Let's see if we can manage with the concept board, because it's a pity.
Rosie, I like that you came next after my comments about aggregation in the last project, because there was a similarity to the aggregation strategy in the first 3 projects. And I see in your project that the conceptual thinking about how to aggregate is quite different. And it seems, I might be wrong about this, I didn't spend much time looking at your early plans, but it seems that it came at the beginning, like you made L-shaped units and U-shaped units, whereas earlier we were seeing kind of box-shaped, square, rectangular-shaped units. And so from the beginning, your building blocks, if you will, were not going to lend themselves to, let's say, an efficient nesting. And so then you went on to have a nesting that was much kind of more sparse, spread out, less kind of centralized and compact. So I think that's really interesting, just for also for myself as a person who writes studio briefs and writes like design processes, to see how those beginning moments can impact the rest of the flow of the project so significantly.
Yeah, I mean, I got that L shape mostly from my horizontal home, since it was like a box with another, like the courtyard in the middle. And so I broke it up into 2 pieces, which were the 2 L's, and then I used that shape. And I liked that it like allowed for there to be more space in the middle, like to separate the units or to give some space for the community to gather.
And even not only did you sort of capture open space in the horizontal, but also some of your units have, or at least one has a slightly split level, right? So you go up a few stairs to go into the sleeping space. And so we see that in the section play out as well, that you get some kind of lifting and lowering, which I think is working to your advantage. In terms of kind of infusing this thing with some spatial richness and complexity. So I think that's working. Those are really positive aspects of the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the section is really interesting. I think that the big piece that is missing is structure, because I mean, you call it floating, and so immediately, and this is something as architects we love to try and do, but of course it's not literally floating. And so immediately the question of how do you deal with how this thing lands on the ground? Is it a set of many little columns? Is it bigger piers that and you have a kind of sort of robust structure that somehow can carry significant cantilevers? Thinking about a project in Montreal, one of Canada's few radical projects, which is called Habitat 67, which was, I'll put it in the chat. It's worth looking at. Canada's not known for Habitat 67 by Moishe Sapti. Anyways, it was actually a student's thesis project that got built, everyone's dream. And it was a set of concrete boxes that basically stagger and each one supports the next one. It proved to be like incredibly complicated to do, but it was built. And its ground floor is also fairly open, and then the cores become kind of major structuring devices. So, but I think thinking about structure, both, and I say it not as just as a banal thing like, oh, you need to think about structure, but I think it's a real design opportunity. And I think especially it would allow you to think about how to structure the ground floor. I think I like that you have these sort of programmatic boxes. This is something that's come up in a lot of projects as well. I mean, one challenge, there's a legacy of sort of modernist housing, which was sort of the tower or bar in the park. And we know that those have generally not fared well, at least in North America, because there's this sort of sense of no one wants to go to a gallery that's set deep into a lot, or no one will go to a cafe that is seen as not belonging to the street. And so I wonder if you could be judicious about some of the program places, like maybe a daycare. Well, actually, your daycare is in the corner, but there's some programs that are maybe really community oriented, where you're not trying to draw the people from the neighborhood in. But I think there's some programs that actually want the visibility of the street. And I guess I'm thinking about their role in structuring the ground plan, and then literally structuring the ground plan. And I think also landscape could be another thing. Like you've got this sort of hatch, which I'm guessing is a kind of decking or paving. But then thinking about how the green space, are those, private gardens sometimes, are those, is that a big shared garden? Is one a playground? And I think the more you can structure that ground plan, the more sort of successful and dynamic it will be.
I would say that's true of all of the outdoor spaces. Definitely at the ground, right? At the ground, you want kind of a thriving public space. And in some places, you really want it to be public, everybody. And then in some parts, you might want it to feel kind of like a garden oasis for the residents or something. But I also think because of your method of aggregation, it leaves a lot of roof spaces. So really thinking about your project has great potential to have very strong thinking about the relationship between indoor and outdoor spaces, between how outdoor spaces at various levels contribute to a sense of community, to a sense of wellness, these other things. And so I think developing that part of the project more would be very beneficial.
Okay.
I would say the AXO is really compelling. Actually, I somehow didn't catch it, now I'm on your board. Like there's something so urban about the AXO and the interweaving of the sort of existing buildings and your building. I think there's something about the urban strategy that as an overall massing is actually really quite compelling. And so I think the next challenge is like the ground plan and how those interfaces work. But I don't know, I find this actually really nice, and feels much more territorialized than the ground plan. And I say that as a positive thing. Like I think I think public space doesn't work when everyone feels like it doesn't belong to anyone, but I think the minute there's a sense of like, this is completely public, this is semi-public, I can go here, I can't go there. And so I think the AXO really does that very, very well.
Thank you.
The other area, I know that these are super early, but when we get into the renderings where you're adding some materiality to them, I think the AXO is super successful, but then the renderings are a bit frightening, actually. And again, I made a comment earlier kind of about where I am in my own thinking. And so I'm projecting a bit of that onto you, but I'm also feeling like a wanting to distance myself from modernism. And so when I see something that is clearly perhaps trying to be firmly situated in that modernist legacy, I worry about like, are you kind of looking forward enough? And so for me, looking forward, and again, I'm projecting onto you things that I am thinking about, but for me, looking forward, our use of materials is really different. So like low embodied carbon, low embodied energy, like of the earth, grown things, stones, earthen things. And so I think that radically would, not to, again, I'm projecting on you, but I think if you took a more kind of future look at how we will need to build in order to not be the main contributors to kind of global climate change, that it has a profound aesthetic difference. And to me, I think that's positive, that we will potentially move away from a look that architects have loved, but a lot of the public haven't. A lot of the public have felt like these brutalist buildings are actually somehow kind of opposing, oppressive, and not welcoming, and we might move into a realm where that's no longer the case, and that the buildings are actually quite welcoming, quite kind of biophilic, or quite kind of hospitable, and speak to us in a very kind of essential way. So I would just kind of encourage you to push on that material component of it.
I think it's an interesting comment. I think the sort of unabashed modernism, I don't have a problem with. And I think where I would agree with Carmen is, and having been to New Orleans, which is so lush, right? Like it's like a jungle in the city, which is kind of amazing. And so I think even if you had a sort of more brutalist building, it would actually, like brutalism in Toronto is brutal. Brutalism in warm climates has a kind of whole other, and then there's just like, handrails and all these things that are not shown that would start to kind of add layers. But I do think, Carmen, you raise an interesting point. Like I'm looking at the project and thinking, this would actually be like a perfect project for mass timber. It's the right scale. Your unit modules could handle the mass timber. And so you could get if that was of interest, it would certainly address Carmen's questions of embodied energy of materials, but would give you a really interesting expression, and actually would force you to deal with structure because timber has very specific spans, but you could start to have this sort of forest of columns on the ground floor that maybe is like paired with a sort of forest of trees, and then you get kind of more solid as you move up. So I think thinking about materials is certainly would be an interesting next step in the project, and how different materials will radically change the expression of the building. But I'm with you with the, I think there's questions of like environmental stewardship that are central, and that one can be like incredibly modern regardless of material,
yeah,
in a way. One small kind of question, or it's interesting looking at the section. I don't know if you can pull one of them up. The units, I'm going to go to the plan at the same time, but some of the modules look very small. They look like they're, I don't know, well, if a person's 6 foot, the sort of second row from the left, I guess, those rooms look like they're sort of 8 foot wide. And I wonder, whether, I think there's interesting questions of scale and what, what works just in terms of a planning and room layout. Maybe I'll go to your rooms as well, but.
I did notice that when I first did the sections. It's mainly because of the way that I chose to like create these spaces. There's a lot of like narrow hallways so that there's other voids, and so the way that it ends up looking in section is that the rooms are small, but most of them actually open up into a bigger room. It's just not shown in the section because that's not where the cut is.
I see. Got it. That's a moment where you sometimes strategically cheat in a section. You tell the story that you want to tell. You don't want to cheat entirely, but it's okay to cheat a little bit. I don't know, maybe in other circles would be, but I've always encouraged small cheating in
yeah, I agree with that comment. Like if you cut through little hallways and little bathrooms, then maybe you want to just shift the cut line for one of those buildings a bit versus another so that you can tell the story that you want to tell. And so for me also, the section, I think this would be a space if you were to continue to develop some things for your portfolio or something like that. This is a drawing that I would spend some time working on. And I wonder if in some kind of cheating with the section, if you could start to communicate some of the connectivity like right now, these are reading as really distinct bars, and maybe just the one on the right, we see some kind of notion of connectivity between those. But I would try to play up through the entourage, through, of course, adding windows and things like that, adding furniture, but try to play up the visual connectivity between the activities of the different floors, to play up kind of the connections at floors between the indoor and outdoor spaces. And I didn't tell you guys at the beginning, but what I actually teach is I teach the building science and the architectural technology fundamentals class. So I'm always talking to my students about trying to draw things like light, and draw things like heat, or draw things like air flow. And I think your project is well situated because it's kind of sponge-like. I think your project is well situated to try to tell the story of porosity, and in telling that story you could try to draw things like light and air, but you could also not do that, and you could just try to tell the story through better placement of entourage, through furniture, by making it feel very active and dynamic, and then making sure to really capture transparent versus opaque portions of the envelope.
I do think that's a really cool idea, though. Like, I could make a diagram for like heat or light or air, like on top of this section.
Yeah, especially you started with this idea that your project is about shade. Mm-hmm. So in that case, drawing shadows or the absence of light, or drawing the light, would really help for you to communicate how it performs in terms of shade. Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking, how are we doing for time? I don't want to, we're good. I mean, the other thing, well, just pick up on Carmen's comment. I mean, I think also in this section, you know, the project has a sort of hive-like quality. And so we would actually see the elevation of the rest of the building, right? And so suddenly it would feel much more connected, like as a kind of continuous ribbon or system, rather than the two. And that's how you would experience, like if you're in that courtyard, yes, you're in one space, but you're immediately looking out to all the sort of neighboring units and modules. The other thing I was going to say is just coming back to the ground plan is, and this is sort of, will probably come up in every project, because I think it's just really hard, and having taught a housing studio, this was an ongoing discussion as well. But I think the kind of front door and the address, and it's sort of, can you maybe zoom in a little bit? But thinking about, you know, there's some that are fairly close to the street, and so one could imagine pretty easily, you know, putting a number and saying, okay, this is, you know, 432 Cadiz Street or 520, but some start to be really embedded in the block. And so thinking of, I mean, I'm thinking actually of Vivian's project, which had this sort of two streets where, you know, you could imagine those sort of laneways get a name, you know, that laneway, whatever, and so those could become addresses, right? Because there's a dumb reality that literally you need every time you have a front door, you need an address and a mailbox and all those sort of seemingly banal things, but that speak to how a unit exists within the larger urban environment. And so it would be, I wonder if there's sort of certain structuring moves on this ground plan, again, whether it's a laneway or even just very clear walkways or something that would start to kind of link the entrance unit sort of back to the main street, which is where, you know, which is like an inevitable link. I always use the dumb example of the pizza delivery, but like at some point, especially during the pandemic, we have all had many things delivered to our front door. And so that interface becomes kind of key, especially in collective housing. So I think there's a whole set of interesting studies you know, and maybe things like the bike racks can be part of the kind of larger landscape, and the lobbies become sometimes even more generous or more visible. But I think thinking about like literally where the front door is and how you register it as someone walking by is an interesting question.
Yeah.
Okay, if we don't have any other comments, or you want to wrap up to finish, we can continue with the next student.
Okay. Really nice work, Rosie.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let me share. Okay, I need to make it full screen. Is it, do you see it? Hold on. Do you see it moving?
I see it moving, but it's not full screen.
Okay, do you know how I can make it?
I think it's Control L or Command
Okay.
L.
Command L. Oh. Is it moving?
No.
No. Okay, hold on. Sorry.
Ashley, are you on your Mac?
Look
or
at
on your
Yeah.
PC?
Yeah, look at view.
Yeah, go to view and press full screen mode.
View. Okay.
I think you're gonna have to reshare it because we can't see it full screen.
Okay. Let me. Okay. Oh, okay. Hold on. Is it working?
No, I think you should just share your whole screen if you can.
Like your whole desktop.
Okay. Let me. Oh, wait.
The other strategy I've been using a lot lately, not to give you too many things to try, but under share screen at the top, there's advanced, and I've been sharing portion. That looks great, by the way.
Okay, this is moving?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, so.
For your teacher?
Oh, yeah, I can, sorry.
I'm just gonna fill my water glass. I'll be right back.
Hello, everybody. I'm here. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late. I think at least ready to present.
Yeah. Okay.
Good luck.
Well, we're all good. Okay, so hi, my name is Ashley Dwyer. I'm in Andrea Burdon section. I'm a second year undergrad. And my project, I decided to call it Studio Apartment Community Housing and Parks for Multi-Age Groups. To begin, here's an axiometric drawing that showcases the facades of the buildings and the canopy shaded areas in each park. The design stemmed from my horizontal home from earlier in the semester, and the design concept came from the central courtyard. It is split between public and private, divided by the corridors and both the courtyard. The next came from my vertical home that showcases the split between public and private between each floor. And each floor is offset to create a balcony so that each level has space and access to the outside. When looking at the site, I noticed that a lot of small businesses are located on the north west side of the site. Some of the sites that are like staying and remaining are Charlie's Steakhouse, French Truck, a duplex, and there's a school on the south side. I then looked at the access areas of the site, and I wanted there to be an access from every single street, and also have private access corridors for each building. Next, I looked at the vegetation. I wanted to create parks, different ones, some that have playgrounds and gardens, others that contain market space between each units, and open green spaces with lots of trees and shading. I then looked at public and private. I intend for the space to be open to the neighborhood and the community. So I intend for the parks to be more public and the private areas are each unit. This is a site plan with the existing neighborhood and a closer version. So when designing my site, I intend for younger roommates, couples to live in these duplex units or studio units that are located near the northwest side of the site, which are closer to the busier part of the street where all the businesses are located. And then bigger, smaller units for families and elderly people that are on this quieter side of the site and also closer to the school. So how it works is I created these duplexes that are 6 units in each structure, consisting of a 3-bedroom or a 1-bedroom with 3 floors and access to a private balcony, a 2-bedroom that also has a private balcony, and this is a 2-bedroom with a studio. And then looking at the horizontal, or my apartment complex, I created a ground floor plan that has laundry, public, private patio spaces, a workshop, and has an access corridor to each of the units. So depending on which unit you are in, you have a different access elevator or core. There's 12 units on each floor and there's 3 floors. And on the roof, there's a void in the ceiling that has access all the way to the ground that creates ventilation and for sunlight to get into each unit. Looking closer, this is a 1-bedroom unit laid out, a 2, 3, and 4. Looking closer at them, I divided them so that you can see closer. An example of a 1-bedroom unit, a 2-bedroom unit, a 3, and a 4. When looking at my sections, I wanted to showcase the double height patio spaces created in my duplex studio units, and also the void in the ceiling in the big complex unit. This is another one that cuts through this market space between these 2 units and also this park space. Again, highlighting the patio private space in the unit. And then this just shows again the space created from the ceiling courtyard voids. For my perspectives, I wanted to really highlight the green spaces that created in the area. So this is looking at the ground floor of my apartment bigger unit. And this one looks at the market space between the two duplex studio units. And then this one shows the playground garden space that is between two of these units. And then I have some animations that I want to show that show the, hold on. They show the units and how they break apart. Let me share my screen again. Is it zooming in? No. Hold on one moment. Okay. So this just shows the different units created from the studio and the duplexes. This one shows the units in each floor of the different unit. This one shows the 12 units breaking apart. So you can see them in each form in each bedroom, and which applies to the bedrooms. And then this is an exploded axon of the entire building, and how there's 3 levels and 12 on each floor. Okay, thank you. So, do you want me to share my presentation?
I'm on the, what is it called?
Okay.
Share
The
board.
concept board?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Thanks. I mean, although I guess maybe it's useful
Yeah.
to follow it up just because we'll probably keep flipping back and forth. Um,
I'll just leave on this, or I'll go to the site.
So just to clarify, you've basically got townhouses and then the kind of apartment building. Those are the two types. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Got it. And the units in the apartment building, those are they're all 1 story. Like it's an apartment is on 1 floor. Is that right? Or do they?
So there's 3 floors, and each floor has 12 units. They're all separate, divided into either 1 to 4 bedrooms.
Got it. Sorry, I'm panning through the drawings for a moment.
I'm also doing that. Do you have a ground floor plan?
Yes. It's the one that I'm showing on my screen right now. I don't know if you're looking.
So do you have you have a laundry room, maybe a little cafe. Do you have any programs that are meant to be kind of public programs?
I intend for the spaces to be used as they're like marketplaces on the weekends. I didn't show that in my drawings, but there's spaces in this area and also in this area that can be used for market. So vendors, art, produce. But that's a program I intend to also be on the site.
That's interesting. I want to imagine those types of kind of movable cars and trucks or carts or even tents or something coming in and out. They tend to be on hardscaped areas, so something that's kind of more paved than grassy and lush. And maybe we didn't see those parts of your rendering, but in the renderings you showed this thing as being very vegetated, grasses and trees and lots of plant life. So trying to mix those two types of things together, like a marketplace where there's lots of foot traffic, there's maybe lots of kind of moving of heavy stuff in and out that's usually on carts with or other wheeled things. Trying to reconcile that with an aesthetic of something that has a lot of kind of soft vegetation at the ground. I think you could reconcile it with a lush tree canopy, and then the ground is more hardscape. But so something to think about.
I would agree. I mean, I want to say I think it's like a beautifully drawn, not just drawn, designed and drawn, and there's a kind of level of resolution and just the
sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was like, oh no, that's my phone. That's really lovely to see. I mean, I guess a few thoughts. Everything. So the one thing is everything feels like a little bit too tight. And I see, like, I look at your single family row houses, which I'm pretty convinced of. They're 4 stories, so they're, you know, I think realistically these are like upper middle class built houses, right? I mean, once you get to a single house that's 4 stories, even if and so I went, but then I look at the plans and everything's like just a little tight. And similarly for the apartment building, which I like these sort of internal courtyards, but I wonder if you have too many small ones. I mean, I know weather is kind in Tulane or in New Orleans, but I still think like there's a level of like facing, you know, I picture like I'd open my bedroom or my living room and I'd be like, oh God, Joe next door is in his boxers and I can see more than I want to see, you know? And so and you've got room on the site. Like it may be that the balance of open space to built space is a little off, and that you could actually allow all the buildings to grow by, you know, I'm just saying 20% and shrink the open space, so that everything can just breathe a little bit more, especially for the townhouses. And then even for the apartment, I wonder, I mean, I recognize this would affect the plan, but I wonder if fewer bigger courtyards would just make them feel a bit more generous. Like it, even in the section, the tree looks like it's like, God, I can't, don't grow out, you know, like it's there, but it's tight. And then I think also, you know, coming to Carmen's questions about the ground floor of the apartment building, I mean, it's interesting. Almost every project I think we've seen today has wanted to kind of lift the building off and keep the ground floor open. But I could see your ground floor being actually closed. I mean, you have so much open space. I don't know if you need the open space under your building. And I think you could have like a cafe or a store or a small grocery store or something, like anything that actually, and just fill it and let the ground floor be public. I mean, not public, commercial potentially, or it could be you know, it could be your community programs, but that fill much more of the you know, fill much more of the plan of your apartment. And then your courtyards, I think, get more charge. Like I wonder if you have too much open space and it starts to kind of cancel itself out. And the other thing I was thinking about is, again, thinking about these townhouses, they would actually want a small garden. I mean, if it's like, and there's lots of interesting precedents, I mean, in Holland, or even we're seeing it in Toronto, where like all it takes is a small terrace or a small front zone, which is yours, where you can, like, if you're paying for a 4-story townhouse, I guarantee you also want to be able to like sit outside on a nice day. And so I think there could be gradients of, I'll call it private outdoor space, semi-private, maybe it's like collective to the entire apartment building, and then much more public, you know, open space. And I want to say, I love your diagrams. Like I think you've got all the tools to do this. And so I could imagine a diagram of open space that would look at, you know, private, semi-public, and public, or you might want to come up with better terms. Those aren't great terms. That would allow these, and then there would be interesting thresholds of like, how do I make a private garden that's looking out onto a shared garden, you know, but there are precedents, and I think you could do that through section and vegetation and so forth. But really a lot of nice qualities in the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also noticed that people were shying away from letting the residential units land at the ground level. And yet, you know, the residential buildings do that all the time, including the existing buildings that are remaining on the site. So for your townhouses, I think you might look at some of those strategies that you can learn from the suburban existing developments, or even from other cities. I lived in Brooklyn for a long time, which is, you know, a pretty dense fabric with row houses or townhouses that come right down to the street, but they almost all had like stoops where there were a few stairs, so that you were disconnected from that public realm by an elevation change. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but it's just enough that kind of gives you this sense of arrival. It gives you a bit of privacy. And then here in New Orleans, of course, we have the porch, which does the same thing. So I think you could borrow some of those techniques, which if that becomes the place where people like to hang out and do some of the, have this like place to sit outside, it also is so catalyzing in terms of just building a neighborhood and building a community of people. So I think that you could, again, as Lil was saying, be a bit more generous with the space allocation for each unit, and consider taking some space to provide kind of this front porch or stoop in those townhouse units. And then if you could go to your next floor plan. Yeah, would you zoom in like the lower right corner so we could see one block? There are some, yeah, that's perfect.
I'll do, yeah.
That's good. So some things, and maybe I just don't totally understand, but some things like thinking about your courtyards, not only as vertical subtractions from the volume, but in section, they could start to kind of connect with each other too. So one thought is just like, could those walls go away so that at this level, when you arrive on that stair landing, you are in a courtyard, not just looking at the courtyard through a window, but in a courtyard. And so I think there are potentially also opportunities in other places too, to take away some of those walls, let the courtyards feel a bit more generous. And I don't know if you have space for it, but in some spaces, it really does feel like, well, Lil was saying take more space, but just letting some of these things like also start to connect, and they just get a bit more dynamic as they weave and rotate through the plan. And on the next floor, the next story up, you connect these two here, and on the next floor up, you connect those two. And I think it could just start to just give a little bit more air, more light, and a more kind of complex connectivity between the various units.
Okay.
And I do, in general, kind of for all of the projects, I do worry a bit about how successful those parts of the ground floor are, or just the landscape that's underneath a 4-story building. I noticed in your project, you did a good job of really making that low level very tall. So it looked like it was almost a 2-story high space or something, which I think is a good thing. That'll help make it not feel so kind of cave-like and dark. But it's deep, right? The building is pretty deep. So you're talking about a lot of cave-like space. When I teach on campus, which I haven't been there for almost a year and a half, but our architecture building has one of these spaces, and there are some parts of it that are like 1.5 stories, and it's problematic. It is dark and cold and always in shade. And then we have one space that's like 4 stories tall, and it's good. It feels good with roof over it. The program goes over it. So it might also be a case where the building is even a bit more mushroom-like. So on the lower level, you take out a unit or 2 so that it starts to have the capacity for feeling like higher ceilings and allowing for light to get deeper into those spaces.
Thank you so much for the comments and for
Yes, thank you.
And for your presentation, Ashley. It's been great.
Thank you. It was nice listening to hear what you had to say and other suggestions.
Yeah, really nice work. Really nice.
I don't know, one last quick comment, and I don't know why I'm thinking about this project because it doesn't have any obvious relationship to your project, but I was thinking about the work of Lacaton-Vassal, which, I mean, actually now probably everyone knows them because they just won the Pritzker Prize, but they sort of transformed how we think about housing because their argument was luxury is space. It's not finishes. It's it's really space. And so they would often produce for the same price apartments that were, let's say, 20 or 30% larger, but without all the sort of fancy finishes. And I was just thinking about Carmen's notations on your plan of like you could get rid of this wall, you could get rid of this wall, and it was making me think like it would be interesting to think and similarly in the I guess you, Carmen, you were doing that on the apartment plans, but I think one could do the same thing almost on the unit, the townhouse units. And it was just making me think like, how many walls could you get rid of? And it's not to advocate for the open plan, but could you, what is the least amount? And then people could kind of put a bookshelf if they want to subdivide. I mean, there's some things that need definition, like a bathroom or their bedrooms probably want enclosure, but I think it feels like the plan could get uncluttered, and maybe you justify, let's say something like the townhouse, which is quite generous in size, by saying it's kind of a simple raw shell. I'm going to give you some drywall and some simple floors, and then each floor has a kind of flexibility to be 1 bedroom or 2 smaller bedrooms or a big living room, dining room, whatever. But I mean, I both love the articulateness of the plans, but I wonder in your case whether it almost wants to be less articulate, whether you want to pare away things to kind of open it up.
Okay. I'll take a look at that, by the way.
Their work's really interesting.
Okay. Well, thank you both.
I think I'm going to jump to the next room. Thank you so much, Lola, Carmen. Nice to meet you. And thank you, Ashley.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm next. I'll just share my screen, but I'm gonna wait for Professor Lockhart.
Ashley, on the last drawing we were just looking at, right in the middle at one of the stairs, there was something that, I don't know, looked like something with lots of buttons or something. What was that?
Let me look at that. What's well, there's an elevator. I don't know, but that's square.
Sorry, in the section?
Oh, in the section?
In the section. The last
okay.
drawing I'm just looking at. Oh, you know what? I was looking at it on concept board.
Okay.
In the section, yes.
It could be just the way I drew my furniture, in the line weights. I'm trying to find your mouse. It's furniture,
Okay.
like fixtures in the bathroom and stuff. That's just where I cut it through, and I do those details. That's what I would have to think it is.
Okay. Why did you choose to draw the tree roots?
Oh, that was a suggestion from a different professor in the past. I forgot who, but it was to make the ground more dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was cutting through them anyway, and it was just a design element I wanted to show.
Yeah. I like it. My partner is a landscape architect, and so that's partially how he draws. He'll show the roots. He usually shows the roots are like twice the width of the canopy of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
So when you draw them like that, you really start to see this like network of stuff that's everywhere around the building. The only thing I would say about the way you're drawing them is that the line weight gets a little heavy.
Okay.
So it does become a sort of a focal point. There's a lot of contrast at that point in the drawing. And so it draws your eye to those tree roots.
Okay.
So Lola, you guys have not been in person.
No, we have been online since, well, I'm on sabbatical this year. Well, sorry, as of January, but yeah, we have been online since March 13th, 100%. Yeah. And actually California that was like a pretty swift declaration. I remember that. Actually, I think the California schools were the first to announce online. And now I'm not even sure. I think we're still trying to figure out if in the fall, I mean, everyone's talking about a hybrid model, which I don't really know how that works. That seems like an administrative nightmare.
Yeah, a hybrid model scares me a lot too, because, well, formatting your class for online teaching is, at least my classes, they are a whole different animal than the in-person. And so needing to prepare both kind of approaches at the same time seems nearly impossible.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Carmen, Lola,
Back.
Jessica.
You made the full circuit.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Guillermo, there is something about the link, the link of Room Lockhart that is not allowing people without, but I don't know why, without Tulane email to enter, but that's not the case for Lola and Carmen. I don't know why Gabe is not able to enter. Anyway, he is in another room now, but
Okay.
for now here we're waiting, I guess, for Carrie, is that correct? Or, oh no, you're waiting for you. Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. So may go
Perfect.
to Norman room to see what happens there, but.
Thank you, Margarita. So Jessica, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jessica Seidel, and this is the NOLA Notes Collective. Here's my main isometric. At the beginning of the semester, we were assigned 1 to 2 week-long projects where we had to design horizontal, vertical, and sectional homes for students or a family of 5. These short assignments taught me the values of designing homes with specific requirements that would later play a much bigger role with the collective housing unit. The site we are working with is a populated area with 2 existing commercial spaces, a coffee shop and a steakhouse, and a school located on the neighborhood block right next to it. Working around these existing areas, I valued having large open spaces on the ground floor to allow for public and collective mobility. The proposed site offers 5 collective and public spaces ranging from recording studios to a daycare where residents and guests alike can take advantage of the different programs on the ground floor. In the center of the site is a large circular stage where musicians can perform. Performers can be heard and seen all throughout the site and specifically at the 4 main entrances in the north, east, south, and west. Porches have always played a major role in traditional New Orleans architecture. Every unit in a typical plan has either a shared or private porch-like entrance into the home. Each floor also has a collective space for residents to sit and enjoy a nice cup of coffee. NOLA Notes Collective is a co-housing neighborhood designed with musicians in mind. New Orleans is known for its music. As the birthplace of jazz, music is the drive for the project. The ground floor contains the commercial and collective spaces and the 4 vertical cores to access the residential areas. Because New Orleans is a largely flat area, playing with the topography of the site allowed me to create a sort of natural amphitheater where residents can sit and watch or perform on the stage. 2 important spaces on this floor are the instrument shop and the recording studio that are available to the public. Additionally, including a daycare on Baronne Street and which was closer to the school, was vital to create flexibility for working parents. Each floor contains a different typology, small, medium, or large, and will always have a large collective space for all residents, and smaller collective spaces like the porches. This section shows the relationship between each level. Section B highlights the interiors of the unit, while Section A highlights the walkways on each floor. NOLA Notes Collective is meant to be a vibrant community where you can find performers on the ground floor or even on their balconies. It was essential to highlight the relationships between the units and the walkways. Additionally, showing the connections between the units and their shared porches to maintain the sense of a traditional New Orleans home, even above ground level. Each unit is designed with the public living spaces in the front, the kitchen, living, and dining room, and the private spaces towards the back to ensure separation between the different spaces. Along with the front porch, every unit contains a private balcony where residents can enjoy the outdoor space on their own. and again, my main isometric. And then I have my exploded axonometric animation on concept board that I'll quickly share. 1 second. Okay, I'm just gonna share my whole screen. Oh no, it's here. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, I'll share my full screen. Okay, here. And the animation just shows the stacking of each level. So you can see how it works. And I can show it again. Now let me go back to the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for your
you.
presentation. I don't know if the reviewers want to take a look at a specific drawing. Or you can leave in.
I think this is a good place to start on the ground floor plan. And I'm also kind of panning around the concept board. You know, Jessica, that one of the things I appreciate about your scheme, which is something that has come up a lot today, is the relationship of kind of public serving programs to the street. And so in your case, you really are embracing that street edge. You're really at the back of the sidewalk, right? Which I think in many ways is a very good place for those programs to be, that you can just really be at the sidewalk, readily see what's going on inside of them. It allows for those kind of chance encounters, and you know, as you're driving by, you can get a sense of what's going on inside of there. So I think that that's smart that you've pushed those programs to the perimeter. What we don't yet see, which I would definitely work on this before you kind of get into the portfolio phase, is some indication of like doors, windows, transparency versus opacity in those spaces, if you intend them to be, as we've talked about earlier, are these double-sided spaces that are meant to engage people from both directions. And if so, like, how do they differ? The side that opens to the street versus the side that opens to the courtyard. I think when you're talking about kind of musicians all over the place, that I think you probably do want some connectivity to your interior spaces. You want to think about the recording studio having, I don't know, a back deck or something that is a spillover space for that activity to kind of happen in your public spaces, and to somehow kind of be able to activate your public space. And yet perhaps the front door is on the street side. Am I seeing your daycare? The playground is right at the corner. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know this neighborhood, and so that might be a perfectly wonderful location. Though my only question would be kind of about heat. I believe that's the south corner of the site, and so but perhaps it's very shaded by your building above. I can't quite tell. And then I also think that your idea about it using the interior space as an amphitheater is really a good, strong idea. It's been one of the questions throughout the day about how to really kind of activate and enliven these garden spaces, especially because everybody seems to be lifting and leaving the ground plane as an open amenity space. So I like that you are thinking of specific programs that could happen in there, and that it's tied to your retail programs. I do think that the geometry is a little bit awkward, which having these kind of straight boulevards and then the circle seems to be kind of a little bit oddly positioned in that space, and then the contour of the ground around it, that it just seems like perhaps a little bit more control or thoughtfulness about how the intersection of your orthogonal pathways, the contouring of the earth, and then the sunken kind of stage or performance area, a little bit more kind of thinking about how those things work together, geometrically speaking. Lola, was that you sketching?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just thinking, I mean, I feel sheepish because one ends up thinking like there's only one answer, which is things must address the street. But I agree with you, Carmen. I mean, I think the public programs kind of holding the street is working really well. And so I'm wondering about then the entrances to the apartments, which are feel really small. Like I don't know if you imagine you and your two children, or your husband, I don't know, two people arriving for a party, and it's like it looks like there's and you're carrying groceries or something. There's kind of it. I mean, so they just feel like they could get more generous. But then I guess I was thinking, do they? I mean, I guess I will annotate, but I'm not even convinced quite of what I'm drawing. But thinking like, do they all? Is there always a pairing of like an entrance to a cluster of things, cluster of apartments, and then a public program? And then this one is sort of already doing that, so maybe it just needs to get kind of bigger. And then here, like this one is sort of oddly hidden, and so does that one snap here, or does this one snap there? I don't know. And then suddenly, like every front door to apartments would also have a kind of public visibility, and then this is really left to be collective or or semi-private, however you kind of imagine that. Now I recognize what I'm proposing renders your courtyard less porous. I will say I think it's really hard. The previous project was, or 2 projects ago, was proposing a market, and you're proposing concerts, and I don't know the neighborhood, so I could be really wrong, but I think these kinds of programs want like real public space, like a market. To Carmen's point earlier, wants hardscape. It's messy. It wants to be able to bring in many people, and even noisy. Or if one wanted music, maybe actually one keeps a corner clear, and that becomes the space, because then you're easily, someone's playing and you're easily drawing someone off the street. So it may be that the kind of amphitheater or performance space doesn't want to be, interior to the block. The other thing I was thinking about is, hold on, let me clear my mess so we're not looking at it. It's interesting. The building is almost. Can you go to a second floor plan? It's almost like individual houses laid out on this kind of collective deck, which I think is interesting, and it almost makes me wonder. Could you treat them like stacked houses? Like, do you even need the elevator? You're only at 4 stories. I mean, it's a bit of a hike if you're on the 4th floor, but maybe your third and fourth floor become actually double-story units. And so no one to get to their front door has to walk more than 2 stories up. But I was suddenly wondering, like, could you really embrace the idea of stacked individual houses that, yes, there's a courtyard that gets you around, and there's a lot of Dutch projects. I mean, I guess the Dutch projects that I'm thinking of do have elevators, but I guess it's interesting. It's not really an apartment building. It has this kind of porosity, and so I guess I was wondering, it'd be interesting as an experiment. Like, could you really push that each person walks up to their front door, and so it might be 1 story, it might be 2 stories. And then you don't, and everyone, has a kind of direct front door to kind of ground connection without the mediation of the elevator. I mean, questions of accessibility then are significantly positive, or maybe some units that you want to be accessible, they get the kind of stair core / elevator, but other ones, anyways, I mean, it might produce a lot of inefficiency, but it feels like you're halfway there. And so conceptually, it'd be an interesting experiment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great idea. And if I had more time, I would obviously love to explore that. And something that we were told like in the beginning of the semester is just like having these like vertical cores as kind of like staples.
Yeah.
But what I wanted, I tried to create that is to have like kind of like these like separate homes. So it didn't feel like an apartment complex. It felt more like kind of like a traditional New Orleans like shotgun house.
Right.
More or less.
Or even, I mean, I guess there's a scenario where your stairs are outdoor and parallel. Oh, hold on, I'll sketch it. This kind of where your stairs could be running, you know, as part of your corridor system, and then you really just have elevator cores. And so, because again, the weather in New Orleans allows that, right? You can have covered or even outdoor stairs. And then only your elevator is this kind of pier that does its job. And it would maybe feel less like, again, like sort of cores or fire stairs that we're seeing a lot of. I mean, yours are glass, so I recognize you're imagining them as kind of open and airy, but I don't know.
Yeah,
it would make
thank
it
you
like
so
a
much.
three-dimensional city, really. I mean, I'm imagining a bit of Escher, maybe.
Yeah, I actually was looking at when I think it was you who mentioned it, Habitat 67.
Yeah.
And I just looked up a few photos of it, and I thought that like I could gain inspiration from that. Like if I had known about it earlier, it would definitely be used as a precedent.
Mm-hmm. I would just like to echo Lola was maybe feeling self-conscious about recommending that things connect to the street. And I just do really want to say that in an urban condition, there's such a reciprocal dependency between the street and kind of the interface of the building. And so the street is already such a place of activity and liveliness. And then so a building benefits from the connection to that space of activity, but then the building is also a source of activity. And so the building like feeds back into amplifying the activity of the street. So I do think it's not that you have to, the only answer is to put things at the street, but I do think that all of your threshold experiences should be conceptualized as the street as kind of integral to that threshold experience. And so as you arrive to the next part of the threshold experience, which would be getting to the stair or the elevator or something, just really thinking about it in relation to the street. And really kind of conceptualizing in what way is the street like helping to benefit that spot in terms, and we mentioned Jane Jacobs earlier, so in her way of thinking, it's kind of the eyes on the street, it provides safety, it provides a place for lots of interaction between people. Having lots of eyes on the street is really an essential part of a healthy, thriving community. So thinking of it through that lens, I think also helps you to think about how do you relate those entry points back to the street? So I think it's a really important point.
A small thing I mean, another question that again, it's sort of completely different, but I'm thinking of Sejima's Gifu housing in Fukuoka, I think, which is this long, I mean, it's, 10, actually, I think it's 15 or 20 stories. But she has these pockets. So it's a long linear building that sort of zigzags. I'll put it in the chat in case you, it's Gifu housing by, I never remember if it's like, she has like two firms. So it's either Sejima or Sana, but anyway, it's this long linear project, and it has a kind of exterior stair, and I think between every unit, there's a kind of outdoor shared terrace that's within the thickness of the bar, which is more or less what you're doing. And so, I mean, I think yours is actually far more humane or human than hers, but the role of the stair that kind of winds its way up and could encounter these sort of shared or private gardens, I think could be really interesting. And it was making me think that I think in your section you should, well, your floor to ceiling heights might be a little on the low side. It looks like someone can like touch the ceiling quite easily. So that's a small thing. You may want to stretch them all. But I think drawing the courtyard and making it legible as a kind of outdoor space in the drawing, because right now it's only evident by the absence of furniture. But again, what I know of New Orleans, people would have plants, there would be vines, there would be like, it would feel very different. And I think the way you're, you know, both in the section and even in the AXO, it looks heavier than I think it would need to. I think you could play off the contrast of the units being obviously fairly solid, and then these walkways being, you know, I don't know if they're like the thinnest possible metal grates, or, you know, they could be. I'm thinking of all the metal work I saw in New Orleans that kind of picks up the sort of old French vernaculars. But anyways, I think there could be a contrast of the box and then the kind of horizontal infrastructures, and that could play into the tectonics and into a kind of transparency to the building, or a lightness that the AXO right now looks kind of very opaque and heavy. And I think that's partly just an experiment. I don't know that what I'm proposing is better, but I think there's a whole material study that could happen next that would be really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. We have like a few minutes. If Carmen or Lola want to like make a final comment. If not, then we will have to go to the room 0 so we can all meet there, and we can thank you all. We can thank all the reviewers for being here this long afternoon session. It was really valuable feedback for the students, and it was really a pleasure of hear you all the comments and all the notes. All the references also. So we're really glad of having you all here. So let's go to the room 0 and we all meet there. So we conclude this session. And of course, thank you very much, Jessica, for your presentation. Thank you very much, Vivian, for being the timekeeper, and for all of your classmates that are here hanging on till the last one. So I will see you there, and room 0.
I would just make one last comment for Jessica.
Yeah, of course.
So I think it was in Rosie's project where we talked a bit about the section, and I think you have a similar strategy as Rosie, where there's actually lots of voids in the project. Your section doesn't capture that, right? And even in the axonometric, it kind of, we don't get a sense of that. So I would encourage you to spend some more time in the section, and even consider to continue to design in the section. And so looking for things to subtract to allow more connection between sky and ground, and things to kind of stretch vertically. So whether that's ceilings or kind of pulling up parts of the building, but looking for ways to, like, as I said earlier, kind of draw the shadows or draw light, draw sunbeams, trying to find its way to the ground. I think could be very helpful. And I don't know kind of what your constraints were in terms of height limits, but you also ended up with, as most people did, a flat roof, like everything ends at a certain point, and you might find yourself able to take a little something off over here, add it over here, and change the configuration, change the massing a little bit in order to make it feel a bit more airy in the section, because I think in the plan it's really actually quite open. We just don't, it's not captured in the section cuts.
And
Thank you so
structure.
much, Carmen and
Structure.
for all that
Structure's a friend.
commentation.
It took me many years of undergrad to realize, I think it actually took me till my master's, but structure is one's friend as a design tool, not just as a constraint. I think it would really be an interesting, you know, you could take your plans and just like overlay a passive structure and see what happens.
Mhm.
See you all later.
Thank you very much. I'm posting in the chat the link for you to go to the room 0. So I'll see you there.
Ciao.
Thank you very much.